He came looking for a horse, nothing more, not a name, not a place to stay the night, and certainly not the weight of anyone's expectations. Caleb Morgan had learned that love came with chains and roots he wasn't meant to wear. But when he crossed into Elm Hollow, just before the sky broke open with rain, something shifted. It wasn't the kind of place a man passed through. It was the kind that made him wonder what if all the miles behind him were just a long ride home. The late afternoon wind carried the smell of wet pine and dying summer as Caleb Morgan urged his mare down the muddy ridge trail. Below, the valley stretched out like a half-folded quilt golden grass. Groves of shivering aspen and a patch of fence too crooked to be anything but handmade. He hadn't planned on stopping long, just long enough to swap coin for a horse sturdy enough to carry him into the next nowhere. He had gold in his pocket. 3 years of breaking wild stock, driving cattle, and sleeping under stars in silence had earned him that. Enough to buy the finest gelding in the county. And maybe, just maybe, enough left over to disappear for good. The ranch came into view just as thunder cracked low against the sky. A pale blue farmhouse with a sagging porch, a leaning barn whose red paint peeled like old scabs, and a horse pasture dotted with glimmering silhouettes in the fading light. The place looked tired, like it had once dared to dream, but forgot how. Caleb's hand brushed the small leather pouch inside his duster. The coins inside were warm against his ribs like a heartbeat he didn't trust. He guided his mare down the final bend in the road, boots heavy with trail dust, jaw clenched against a wind that smelled like coming rain. It was only then that he noticed what was missing noise. No barking dogs, no shouting hands, no hammering or laughing or cursing. A spread that size should have been crawling with life, especially this close to sundown, but the only sound was the squeak of the barn door swinging half open in the breeze, and the soft thud of his horse's hooves on damp earth. He dismounted in front of the house. The porch groaned under the weight of time, and something about it made him hesitate. Not fear, not yet, just stillness, like the place was holding its breath. Then the door opened. She stepped out like a story half-written red hair pulled back in a knot of practicality, flower on her skirt, and green eyes that caught every detail before you knew you'd offered it. 35, maybe. Or the kind of 30 that grief makes older. Caleb removed his hat by instinct. "You're here about the horses," she said. Not asked. Her voice had that low Irish edge, like music with a memory behind it. "Yes, ma'am," he replied, clearing his throat. "Caleb Morgan. Saw the notice in the Cheyenne paper. Said you had fine stock for sale." Something flickered in her face relief. Maybe. Or fear of needing to believe in good news. "I'm Rose Callahan," she said. "My late husband bred them. Everyone born here. Raised to work cattle, not to be broken." Caleb's mouth went dry. Late husband. That explained the silence and the sadness in the corners of her voice. She didn't offer a handshake. She didn't smile, but she didn't flinch either. "Come take a look," she said simply. They walked in silence toward the pasture. The horses came into view, sleek, strong, heads high with curiosity, not fear. One, a coppery mare, stepped close to the fence, ears forward. "She's called Maple," Rose said. "Gentle as dawn, but knows her way around a drive." Caleb nodded. These weren't just good horses. They were exceptional, trained with patience, not pain. The kind of animals a man didn't just ride, but trusted with his life. And suddenly he saw it, not just the herd, the crooked porch, the sagging barn. The ghost behind her eyes. This woman was trying to hold together a life meant for two with just her bare hands and sheer will. "May I ask," Caleb said slowly, "how many you're raising out here?" She met his eyes. Not proud, not ashamed, just real. 6, she said. Ages 5 to 16. Caleb blinked. 6. Alone. A ranch falling down around her, and still she had clean windows, tended stock, and kids kept inside out of harm's way. "You've got more grit than half the men I've worked beside," he murmured. Her jaw tightened. "Grit doesn't fix roofs or feed children, Mr. Morgan, but it's all I've got." The first raindrops landed between them like coin on a poker table. Heavy, slow. A warning. Rose turned toward the barn. If you'd rather not get wet, the barn's dry enough to talk numbers. Caleb hesitated. Just a beat. He came for a horse. But something in the way her eyes never blinked, in the way the horses trusted her, in the way the porch sagged but stood, something told him he might have just ridden straight into the only story worth staying for. The barn smelled of cedar, rain, and something older like time itself had curled up in the corners to sleep. Caleb ducked under the wide beams, his boots thudding softly against packed earth. Rose walked ahead, a lantern in hand, casting flickering gold across hay bales and saddle racks. Outside, the rain had thickened, drumming a steady rhythm across the tin roof like distant hoofbeats. "You've kept it in good shape," Caleb said quietly. "I patch what I can," Rose replied, pausing by the stalls. "The rest, I pray, holds through one more storm." It wasn't false modesty. The barn was weather-worn, but orderly tools hung in place, tack clean and mended, feed stacked neatly. Everything spoke of pride, if not ease. "I'm surprised you're still holding on to so many," he said, eyeing the sleek silhouettes in the shadows. "You could have sold these horses off months ago." "I tried," she said, setting the lantern down. "But no one wants to pay what they're worth. Not when they see the porch roof and the empty fields. They think desperation means discount." Caleb gave a soft grunt of understanding. "You raised them all yourself." Rose hesitated. "Not just me. Jesse helps." A brief smile tugged her lips. "He's 16 and stubborn enough to be useful." There was pride in her voice now, hard-earned and tempered by exhaustion. As if summoned, the barn door creaked open again, and a tall, lanky boy stepped inside. Dark hair, hawkish eyes, a rifle slung casually over one shoulder. "Ma," the boy called. "We're fine." "Jesse," she answered, before introducing them. "This is Mr. Morgan. He's looking to buy—" Jesse didn't shake hands, just nodded, sharp and wary, eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "You here alone?" he asked, voice edged with suspicion. His finger hovered near the trigger, not resting, not threatening, just ready. Caleb liked him instantly. "Just me and my mare." Jesse gave the faintest nod, then leaned back against a post, like he meant to stay until this stranger was on his way. "I don't raise them to be suspicious," Rose muttered under her breath. "But I don't stop them either. They live in the world," Caleb replied. "You'd be foolish not to teach them what it can be." Outside, lightning forked across the sky, throwing the pasture into sudden brilliance. For a moment, the world was silver and shadow, then gone again. The wind had picked up, howling through the broken chinks in the siding. Rose turned toward the stall, brushing her hand across the muzzle of a bay gelding. "This one's Flint. 5 years. Fast. Smart. Has a habit of reading people better than most men I've known. Sounds dangerous," Caleb said with a half smile. To the wrong rider. Maybe. A gust of wind slammed the barn door against its hinges, and suddenly, Caleb saw shapes dart past the high windows, quick, fleeting, and low to the ground. Children. Not just Jesse. Another face. Younger, with ink-smudged cheeks. Then a mop of red hair that matched Rose's. A girl no older than 10. Finally, 2 tiny shadows near the porch, holding hands, peering into the dark like it could answer all their questions. "How many?" Caleb asked softly. Rose followed his gaze, her jaw setting. 6. He couldn't stop the whistle that escaped him. "You raise 6 kids and run a ranch." "No," she said. "I survived 6 kids. The ranch is barely hanging on." Caleb rested a hand on the stall's beam. "That's more than most do with twice the help." She glanced at him, then really looked, and for the first time, he saw what she was hiding behind the straight shoulders and efficient movements. Not fear, not weakness. Weariness. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes every morning a question. "They don't need to know how close we are to losing everything," she said. "That's not a burden for children. They already know," Caleb said gently. Rose's lips parted, ready to deny it, but then the barn door creaked again, and the red-haired girl stepped inside with a tin cup. Ma says Mr. Morgan might be staying for dinner. I brought sweet tea. Rose stared, blinking like she'd forgotten how to respond. Caleb knelt to the girl's height. Well, thank you, miss. June, she said proudly. I'm 9. Jessie says I talk too much. Caleb accepted the tea and nodded solemnly. I think talking's a good way to let the world know you're paying attention. June grinned, then skipped off into the rain. She was 5 when Henry died, Rose said suddenly, her voice breaking for the first time. Still asks if Papa's just gone to town. The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. Caleb set the tea aside, clearing his throat. You've got something here, he said finally, a kind of treasure most men don't even know how to want. Rose crossed her arms, like she was bracing herself. And you, Mr. Morgan, what is it you came looking for? Caleb met her gaze. A horse, he said truthfully. But now, I'm not so sure. The storm settled in with the stubbornness of a mule, drenching the roof with steady fists of rain as twilight faded to indigo. Inside the farmhouse, the air smelled of venison stew, bread fresh from the oven, and wood smoke curling in slow ribbons from the hearth. Caleb had expected silence, maybe awkward tension. What he found instead was motion, a living rhythm. June was setting out tin plates, her tongue poked between her teeth as she folded napkins into neat triangles. The boy with ink-stained fingers, Miles, was quietly flipping through a book too large for his lap, scribbling notes with a chewed pencil. 2 younger ones, Ruby and Ben, hovered near the oven, chasing the scent of something warm like bees drawn to honey, and Jessie stood near the hearth, stoking the fire with practiced ease, the rifle from earlier now resting in the corner like a question temporarily put to bed. Rose moved through them all like a current through water, steady, invisible, essential. Caleb stood awkwardly in the doorway, his wet duster hanging by the stove. His shirt clung to his back. His hands itched from doing nothing. His heart... Well, that was the part he didn't have words for. Come, Rose said simply, nodding toward the empty chair at the head of the table. Eat. He obeyed. As the family settled in, Rose handed him a bowl heavy with stew. The spoon was mismatched, the napkin frayed, but there was care in every detail. Someone had even laid a single sprig of rosemary on the crusty loaf of bread in the center, like it was a feast and not just supper on a rainy night. Jesse bowed his head and said grace, his voice steady and solemn. We thank you for the food, for the roof, and for the strangers who may not be strangers long. Amen. Caleb's chest tightened. He wasn't used to being included in other people's prayers. Conversation picked up quickly, and though it was simple talk weather, chores, school, it was stitched with laughter and interruptions and the kind of easy chaos that only families seem to understand. You've got 6 kids, Caleb said to Rose as he spooned up stew, but only 5 at this table. Rose smiled faintly. Not quite. You haven't met the youngest yet. As if summoned by mention, a small figure peeked around the doorway. Bare feet, tangle of curls, a corn-husk doll clutched in both hands like a lifeline. That's Lila, Rose said softly. She's 5, shy around new faces. Caleb turned slightly, careful not to move too fast. Hey there, he said gently. That's a fine doll you've got. Lila crept forward, steps hesitant but curious. She stopped just beside her mother, peering up at him with serious green eyes. Her name's Clementine, she whispered. Well, Miss Clementine's a beauty, he said. Did your mama make her? No, Papa did. Before the sky took him. Caleb didn't breathe for a second. Lila stepped closer, the doll's yarn hair trailing like a question mark. Do you tell stories, she asked. Sometimes. He answered. Can you tell Clementine a story tonight so she won't get scared of the thunder? Caleb glanced at Rose. She didn't say a word, just watched him with eyes that were suddenly unreadable. I'd be honored, he said. That night, after supper, the kids took their places like actors in a well-rehearsed play. Miles dried dishes. June swept crumbs into a pan. Jessie checked the door bolts. Ruby helped Lila into her nightgown and combed her hair in slow, careful strokes. Rose tucked the little ones in with quiet kisses and blankets worn thin from love. Caleb stood outside the girls' room, not sure what to do with his hands. "She's waiting," Rose murmured, gesturing toward the doorway. Lila sat in bed, her doll wrapped beside her like a baby sister. Her eyes were wide and expectant. So Caleb stepped in, pulled the little stool close, and told a story. Not about gunfights or bounty hunters or trails lined with bones. He told a story about a little girl and her doll who got lost in the forest and found their way home by following fireflies. When he was done, Lila whispered, "Do fireflies really know the way?" "Sometimes," he said, "but most of the time they just make the dark feel less scary." She nodded, as if that was enough. Outside the room, Rose waited, arms folded but not coldly. "Thank you," she said. "They haven't smiled like that in a long time." Caleb rubbed the back of his neck. "They've got good hearts." "That comes from somewhere." She didn't answer, just walked past him toward the parlor. As Caleb turned to follow, Jessie appeared from the shadows. "You planning to leave in the morning?" the boy asked. "I was." Jessie nodded, slow and measured. "If you stay, you'll have to work." Caleb smiled. Wouldn't expect anything less. They stood there in quiet understanding. Then Jessie gave a small grunt of approval and disappeared into the dark. That night, Caleb lay on a cot in the parlor. The storm still raged outside, but the warmth of the hearth lingered. He stared up at the beams above, the soft crackle of fire, the only sound between his breaths. He had ridden hundreds of miles to escape the past, and now, for the first time, he found himself wishing morning wouldn't come too quickly, not because he feared the road ahead, but because he wasn't sure he wanted to leave anymore. The next morning cracked open gray and sullen, like the sky itself hadn't slept. The storm hadn't left it, had simply curled up in the hills, waiting. By mid-afternoon, the wind had risen again. Dust danced in violent spirals across the pasture. The clouds lowered themselves like fists. Caleb stood on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the tree line sway like it might snap. Inside the house, Rose moved with a practiced rhythm, her hands kneading dough, her eyes glancing out of the window every few minutes. The children had gone quiet, instinctively understanding that something was building. Then it happened. A roar louder than thunder, the sharp crack of something ancient breaking, and then the shudder. Caleb dropped his mug and sprinted outside. At the edge of the property, where the road dipped into the valley, a great oak had given up the ghost. Its massive trunk lay stretched across the path like a fallen guardian. Thick branches reached in every direction, some as wide as fence rails, twisted and splintered. Mud flew in the wind. Rain returned in cold, deliberate sheets. Rose appeared beside him a moment later, her skirts whipping around her legs. "Is anyone hurt?" she called over the howl. "Not yet," Caleb answered, eyes narrowing. "But if we need to get out, or if trouble comes, we're boxed in." Jessie and Miles joined them, both already pulling on oilskin coats. "We'll clear it," Jessie said without hesitation. His face was pale, but his jaw had that Callahan set to it. Caleb turned to Rose. "We'll need axes. A long saw if you've got it." "I'll get them," Miles said, already running toward the barn. Rose caught Caleb's arm. Her grip was firmer than he expected. "You don't have to do this." Caleb met her eyes. "Yes, I do." The wind answered for her, slamming the porch door against the frame as she turned to gather towels and dry shirts. Within minutes, the three of them, Caleb, Jessie, and Miles, were knee-deep in storm and splinters. The oak tree was even larger up close. Caleb had to stretch his arms just to trace half its trunk. Rain poured in rivulets down his back. The saw bucked in their hands like it didn't want to be tamed. Lightning cracked again. So close, the air snapped. "Stop," Caleb shouted as the sky lit up. "We wait for the thunder." They paused, breathing hard. Mud caked their boots. Their hands were raw and blistering already. The storm raged around them, but in that circle of labor, something else took root rhythm. Jesse hacked at limbs with fury born from fear. Miles, soaked to the skin, dragged cut branches to the ditch with trembling arms. Caleb didn't lead. They moved together. One heartbeat, one breath. No talk, no orders. Just men too young, one grown fighting nature for the right to protect what mattered. During a lull, Jesse leaned on his axe, panting. Pa would have hated this, he muttered. Always said oak trees were stubborn. Caleb smiled through grit. Sounds like he raised his boys the same way. Jesse grunted, but the corner of his mouth twitched. When the rain eased to a drizzle, they'd cleared enough to pass a wagon through, barely. They stood together in the clearing, soaked, steaming, shoulders sagging. Caleb turned to Jesse. You did good. So did you. Miles didn't speak, just nodded, teeth chattering. They returned to the house like soldiers after a long campaign. As they stepped inside, the smell of stew and dry firewood embraced them like forgiveness. Rose stood waiting with towels. She didn't ask questions, just handed each of them warmth and met Caleb's eyes longer than necessary. Thank you, she said, quiet, honest, like it was the only thing she had left to give. June and Ruby gathered around their brothers, fussing over their scraped knuckles. Lila peeked out from behind her doll, her eyes wide with something new, not fear, but awe. Later, by the fire, Jesse sat beside Caleb without invitation. You ever think about staying? The boy asked suddenly. Caleb stared into the flames. I try not to think too far ahead. You seem like someone who could be useful here. Caleb chuckled. Is that your way of offering me a job? Jesse shrugged. Ma says work makes a man part of something. Caleb nodded slowly. She's right. The wind moaned through the chimney like a tired ghost. Rain tapped the window panes in a slower, softer rhythm. Somewhere in the house, Miles was already snoring. Lila hummed to her doll. Rose moved about, extinguishing lanterns. And Caleb, once a stranger, sat by a fire not built by his hands, but warming him just the same. He hadn't come looking for purpose, but it might have found him anyway. The sun rose late and reluctant the next morning, casting long gray shadows across Elm Hollow. The storm had passed, but the ground still held the memory of its soggy soil, broken branches, leaves plastered against window panes like forgotten notes. Caleb stood by the front porch, coffee in hand, watching Jesse coax a reluctant mare into the paddock. The sky was wide and quiet, the kind of morning that pretended nothing bad could ever happen. Then came the riders. 3 of them, their silhouettes cresting the eastern ridge like ghosts in uniform. The lead wore a broad-brimmed hat and a badge that glinted like winter steel. The others flanked him, hands resting too casually on gun belts. Caleb's breath caught. Rose stepped out onto the porch beside him, a dish towel still in her hands. She saw them the same moment he did. Her eyes narrowed. The air changed. What is it? She asked. Lawmen, Caleb murmured, setting his coffee down with deliberate calm. Don't know who they're here for. But he knew. The riders came in slow and sure, stopping just short of the front gate. The sheriff dismounted first tall, thick-set, gray in the beard, eyes like sleet. Name's Grady Mercer, he called out. We're looking for a man named Caleb Morgan. Every sound seemed to vanish, the birds, the wind, the creak of Jesse's saddle in the distance. Rose stepped forward. What's this about? The sheriff pulled a folded sheet from his coat, heavy with mud stains and official ink. Warrant out of Denver. Bank robbery. Witness puts Caleb Morgan at the scene with a known gang led by Reed Colton. Caleb's heart dropped like a stone into deep water. Rose's mouth parted, but no words came. He raised both hands slowly, palms outward. I haven't seen Colton in over 5 years. I left that life behind. Witness says otherwise. Mercer replied. You can argue your case in court. The 2 deputies dismounted and approached. Rose moved as if to step in front of Caleb, but he touched her arm gently. It's all right, he said, though it wasn't. Jesse appeared from the side of the house, fists clenched. This is wrong. Miles stood at the window, face pale. June clutched Lila to her chest. Even Ben, the youngest, had tears in his eyes without understanding why. The sheriff pulled out iron cuffs. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, son." Caleb nodded. He held out his hands. The metal snapped shut with a cold finality that made Lila gasp. Rose's voice trembled. "He's been here all week, working, helping. He's not a thief. I'm sorry." "Ma'am," Mercer said, not unkindly. "But the law doesn't run on feelings." Caleb turned to Rose. "Tell them not to follow. You hear me." But she was already shaking her head, fire building in her chest. "This isn't over," she whispered. As they led Caleb to his horse, Lila broke from June's grasp and ran forward, clutching her doll. "You tell stories," she cried. "Bad men don't tell stories to little girls." Mercer paused. One of the deputies looked away. Caleb knelt as far as the cuffs would allow. "You take care of Clementine, sweetheart, and your mama. I want you to come back," Lila whispered. "I'll try." Then the lawman hauled him up into the saddle, and just like that, he was a prisoner again, riding away from the only place that had ever felt like home. They reached the county jail in Clearwater before dusk. The cell was cold, the cot thinner than memory. Caleb sat with his back against the wall, wrists red from the cuffs, soul bruised by the look in Rose's eyes as he'd ridden away. He hadn't told her everything. Not about the horses he helped Colton steal before he left. Not about the money he'd walked away from or the crimes he couldn't undo. But he had changed. And for the first time, someone had believed he could be more than the sum of his mistakes. He didn't sleep that night. The wind outside sounded different than the storm. Lonelier. Back at the ranch, Rose stood in the parlor, hands trembling. Jesse paced like a caged wolf. Miles sorted through Caleb's saddlebags, hoping for anything that could prove his innocence. June sat cross-legged with a notebook in her lap, writing down every day Caleb had spent with them, what he fixed, what he taught, what he meant. Rose turned to Jesse. "Hitch the wagon. We ride at first light." "To the jail?" he asked. "No," she said. "To the courthouse." "But what if they don't believe us?" Rose looked around at her children. The firelight carved their shadows across the walls like a mural of defiance. "Then we'll make them believe. Because that man sat at our table. He bandaged your hand, Jesse. He read to Lila when she was afraid. He taught Miles how to gentle a skittish colt." Her voice cracked, but her spine did not. "And you do not abandon family." The room fell silent. Then Miles stood. "I'll bring the ledger from the feed store. He signed it when he picked up grain." June raised her hand. "I have the receipt from the general store. He bought nails to fix the barn." Jesse's jaw set. "And I've got the truth." "Ben," the quiet one whispered, "can I bring his hat?" Rose looked to the ceiling like it might give her strength. "Yes, baby," she said. "You bring his hat." And so the Callahans prepared for war, not with guns or fists, but with memory, with love, and with the kind of loyalty that courts do not expect from people without power. They would ride at dawn, not to beg, but to prove. The courthouse in Clearwater wasn't much just 2 stories of sun-bleached brick with warped wooden benches and windows that moaned when the wind touched them wrong. But that morning, it held more people than a church revival. The townsfolk came not for justice, but curiosity. They'd heard the story a drifter with a past, a family with too much to lose. Some came to witness the fall, others came hoping to see Grace win out. The doors slammed open just before the judge entered. Rose Callahan stood in the threshold, her 6 children gathered behind her like a battle formation. She wore her Sunday black dress. Her hair was pulled tight, her jaw tighter. Jesse at her side looked like a man, not a boy. Lila clutched Clementine. Miles carried his notebook like a shield. Every eye turned toward them. Every whisper stopped mid-breath. Judge Rowan, an old man with jowls like worn leather and eyes sharp as nails, adjusted his spectacles. "This court is in session," he announced. "The matter before us, Caleb Morgan, charged with bank robbery and association with known outlaw Reed Colton." The prosecutor, a thin man who looked like he chewed lemons for breakfast, stood. "Your Honor, we have sworn testimony placing Mr. Morgan at the scene of the robbery. A trusted witness. We request swift judgment." Before the judge could respond, Rose stepped forward. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady but full, "we ask to be heard." Rowan tilted his head. "And you are Rose Callahan. This man lived under my roof, worked my land, sat at my table." The prosecutor huffed. "Emotional testimony is not let them speak." Judge Rowan interrupted. "Clearwater may be small, but we believe in truth as well as law. Jesse came forward first. I was with Caleb the day of the robbery. He said, we were fixing the north fence. He taught me how to loop wire so it doesn't snap. Miles followed, holding up his ledger. He signed for feed grain. Same day. Mr. Penner at the supply store can confirm." June stepped up, hands trembling but voice clear. "I kept a list. Every day he was with us. What he fixed, what he built, what he said to Lila when she cried at thunder." She opened her notebook. Her words were plain but powerful. Monday, he fixed the barn door and swept the porch without being asked. Tuesday, he read to Ruby and Ben after supper. Wednesday, he taught Jesse how to saddle a skittish colt. Ben tugged his mother's skirt. "Can I say something?" Rose nodded, crouching beside him. Ben looked up at the judge with wide eyes and said, "He didn't smell like a bad man." The gallery chuckled gently. Then little Lila, not to be left behind, stepped forward, holding Clementine close. "Bad men don't tell firefly stories," she whispered. "Bad men don't kiss you on the forehead and say you're brave." Judge Rowan leaned forward. "Where is the witness who placed Mr. Ning Morgan at the robbery?" The prosecutor shuffled. Not present, Your Honor. His statement was submitted by mail." The judge's brow furrowed. "So you're asking me to jail a man based on hearsay against the word of 7 people who looked him in the eye." Caleb Morgan was a known associate of Reed Colton, yes. A voice echoed from the back. The room turned as a new figure entered, shackled, lean, dangerous. Reed Colton. The air changed. Someone gasped. Jesse stepped in front of his sisters. The marshal beside Colton nodded. "Brought him here as requested, Your Honor." Judge Rowan sat straighter. "Well then, Mr. Colton, do you confirm Caleb Morgan rode with your gang?" Colton grinned, then looked at the Callahan children, and something shifted. His voice, when it came, was quieter than expected. "Caleb left 5 years ago. Told me I was headed for hell and he wasn't coming with." A murmur rose across the courtroom. The prosecutor jumped up. Why lie before? Why admit the truth now? Colton shrugged. "Maybe I finally saw what a good man looks like." He nodded toward Lila. "And maybe I got tired of scaring little girls." Judge Rowan leaned back. Silence reigned. Then he banged the gavel once. "In light of this testimony and the absence of credible evidence, I dismiss all charges against Caleb Morgan." The courtroom erupted not in chaos, but in relief. Cheers, clapping. Rose pressed her hand to her chest. Jesse exhaled. Lila cried openly. When the bailiff unlocked the cell door, Caleb stepped into the light. He looked at the children at Rose, and something in him broke open. He hadn't cried in over a decade. Now, he did. Jesse walked forward, extended a hand. "Told you we wouldn't let them take you." Caleb gripped it hard, then turned to Rose. "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Don't be. You told us who you were. We just reminded the world." He looked around at the makeshift army that had defended him, not with bullets, but with love. And, for the first time, he believed it might be enough. They heard the shots before they saw the riders. 3 cracks split the air outside the Cheyenne Hotel, like thunder tearing through dry cloth. Caleb hit the ground instinctively, dragging Jesse with him behind the hitching post. Glass exploded above them. Someone had fired straight through the second-story window where Lila had just been peeking. Rose's scream cut the silence. The children inside. Chaos bloomed screams. The sound of chairs overturning, boots scrambling. Caleb's heart pounded so loud he couldn't hear himself think. Then he saw them. 3 riders, masked and black-coated, galloping hard down the main street. Guns drawn, eyes set on the hotel like it owed them blood. "They're here for Colton," Caleb said. To silence him before he talks, Marshal Granger appeared at his side, rifle in hand. "They don't care who gets in the way." Another bullet sparked off the railing inches from Caleb's boot. "They're going to hurt civilians," Jesse said, voice taut. "We stop them here," Caleb replied. "We have to." Inside, Rose gathered the children against the far wall of the dining room. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled as she counted heads. Lila, Ben, June, Miles, Ruby. Jesse had run out with Caleb. "Barricade the back door." She told Miles, "Use the chairs. We're not letting anyone in unless it's Caleb or the marshal." Ruby clutched Lila close, her own hands shaking. "Will they find us?" Rose knelt, looking her daughter in the eye. "Maybe. But we don't run from shadows. We light lanterns." Outside, Caleb ducked and sprinted for the sheriff's office across the street. A window shattered above his head. He dove through the door, sliding across the floor as bullets followed him. Granger joined him seconds later, breath short. "We've got rifles," the marshal said, "but not enough men." "Then we change the odds." Caleb growled. He reached into the gun rack and tossed a Winchester to Jesse, who caught it like a second skin. "You ever shoot at something not running on 4 legs?" Jesse's jaw tightened. "Only in my nightmares. But I'll hit what I aim at." Caleb nodded. "Good enough." The three of them emerged like ghosts from the sheriff's doorway, dust-covered, eyes hard, rifles raised. The riders hadn't expected a stand. They turned back toward the street just in time to see bullets crack the dirt inches from their hooves. The shootout that followed felt longer than any war, though it couldn't have lasted more than minutes. Granger dropped one rider with a clean shot to the chest. Jesse winged another's horse, sending him tumbling into a hay cart. The third fired wildly, hitting a sign, then bolting for the edge of town. Caleb ran after him without thinking, legs burning, boots slamming against hard earth. He tackled the man behind the blacksmith's shed, fists meeting flesh with a fury he hadn't known he still carried. "Why now?" he snarled. "Why here?" The man coughed blood. "Because Colton was ready to talk. That's not something our kind forgives." Caleb's knuckles were raw when he stood. Behind him, the sun began to break through the clouds, scattering gold across the blood-stained dust. Later, after the dust settled and the dead were carried away, the townsfolk gathered to thank him. Someone offered money. Another, a medal. Caleb declined both. "You want to help," he said. "Fix the holes in your justice. Don't wait until the bullets fly to ask who you should believe." The marshal approached him as the street emptied. "You know," Granger said, "you've got a gift. You could help us track the rest of Colton's crew. Clean up the mess." Caleb nodded, slowly. "I will, but not alone." Rose joined him on the steps of the hotel, hand sliding into his. "Whatever road you walk," she said, "you won't walk it without us." Jesse appeared behind them, bruised and dust-covered, rifle still slung across his shoulder. "I don't think I'm cut out to be a lawman," he muttered, "but I'd follow you into another fight." Caleb looked at him, at Rose, at the faces peeking from the hotel window, June's red hair catching the sun, Miles already writing down the day's events in his tattered notebook. And he knew the fight wasn't over. There were still people to protect, wounds to heal, money to return, wrongdoings to set right. But now, he wasn't just chasing redemption. He was defending family. 6 months passed like the turning of a page. Snow dusted the hills around Elm Hollow Ranch in soft white. The fences had been repaired, the barn freshly painted. The pasture shimmered with a new herd, lean, powerful, hand-trained by Jesse and Caleb, one careful lesson at a time. The stolen money had all been returned, every last dollar unearthed from canyon crevices, hidden under false rocks, stashed behind old mine shafts, and for every coin they brought back, Caleb felt a little more of his old burden lighten. Marshal Granger returned with 2 men from the Territorial Bank Association. They carried a thick envelope payment for the recovery effort, $15,000, more money than Caleb had ever dreamed of. He stared at it for a long time before he reached for it. "I have a proposal," he said. He counted half the sum back into the envelope. "This goes to a fund for victims of outlaw activity, widows, orphans, families that lost everything." Granger blinked. "You sure about that?" "I'm not trying to get rich," Caleb said. "I'm trying to get right. The other half, he kept for the ranch. for the barn expansion, for education books Miles had requested, for a future, and when the bank men offered Caleb a full-time job as a territorial investigator, good pay, respect, a badge he surprised even himself. "I appreciate it," he said, "but I've already got the best job I'll ever have." He looked over at the porch. Jesse was hammering in the last hinge on the chicken coop, flanked by Ruby and Ben. Miles was in the corner, teaching June to read maps. Rose stood in the doorway, her apron dusted with flour, smiling the smile she rarely gave anyone but the children or him. And little Lila sat beneath the porch lantern, her corn-husk doll cradled in her arms. She looked up and waved. Caleb waved back, then turned to the bankmen. "My place is here." They didn't argue. That night, the family gathered for supper. The table was full, venison stew again, sweet cornbread, and laughter that bounced off the rafters like music. After dinner, Caleb stepped out onto the porch, holding something worn in his hands. A compass, old brass, dulled by years, the glass scratched. Jesse noticed it first. "You still carry that thing?" Caleb nodded. "Always have. Thought I needed it to find somewhere to belong." He popped the back open, revealing a small, faded photograph, his parents, barely older than he was now. "I used to believe I had to earn their forgiveness by staying lost. Like pain was the price of survival." Rose joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. And now, Caleb looked out over the snow-covered field where their horses grazed in the moonlight. "Now I know the truth. Forgiveness doesn't live in the past. It lives in what you build next." Rose smiled softly. "Do you think they'd be proud of you?" Caleb didn't answer right away. Then he kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yeah, I think they finally would." The wind sighed over the hills, slow and peaceful. They stood there for a long time, just breathing in the scent of snow and wood smoke. And when Caleb finally closed the compass and slid it into his pocket, it wasn't because he needed it anymore. It was just a reminder of the man he'd once been and the man he'd chosen to become. Because in the end, some treasures can't be buried. Not in dirt, not in gold, not in shame. Some treasures are built a day by day, choice by choice, hand in hand with the people who believe in you even when you don't yet believe in yourself. And sometimes that treasure is simply this: a warm place to sit, a name spoken with love, a child who calls you Papa, like you'd always been there. A family not born by blood, but bound by something stronger, the brave choice to stay. In this world, it's easy to believe that our past defines us. That our mistakes, our scars, and the times we lost our way are carved too deep to change. But the truth is, this redemption is real, and it's not earned by perfection. It's built through kindness, patience, and showing up again and again for the people who need you. Caleb Morgan didn't find treasure in gold or status. He found it in forgiveness, in a child's smile, in a woman's trust, in a second chance. So if you're carrying guilt or grief or the weight of choices you wish you hadn't made, know this: you are not beyond hope. You are not too far gone, and it is never too late to start again. All it takes is the courage to walk back toward the light and the wisdom to stay when you get there. If this story touched your heart, I invite you to leave a comment below. Tell us which moment moved you most, or share a time someone believed in you when you didn't believe in yourself. And if you want to hear more stories that stir the soul of healing, of home, of hard-won hope, please subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. There are still stories that need to be told. And maybe the next one will be yours.